Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Kagyu Samye Dzong Edinburgh, and to the third and final part of the Discovering Buddhism course. So before we start, let's say the refuge prayer together. And as before, I'll say it in English first, and then we can say the Tibetan phonetics together, and we'll say it 3 times. And then there's another prayer which is to sort of have the aspiration that all beings will benefit from it, which we'll say that one time, and I'll say it again. I'll say it in English first, and then we'll say the phonetics. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the noblest Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the virtue generated by the practice of generosity and other virtues, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Sanjay Chotang Suji Chonamla Changchu Padu Dani Chapsunji Dagi Jinso Jipe Sonamji Dola Pencher Sanjay the Power Show Sanjay Chotang Suji Chonamla Changchu Padu Dani Chapsunji Dagi Jinso Jipe Sonamji Dola Pencher Sanjay the Power Show Sanjay Chotang Suji Chonamla Changchu Padu Dani Chapsunji Dagi Jinso Jipe Sonamji Dola Penche Sanjay the Power Show. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and from creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness that can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal, impartial compassion beyond worldly bias towards friends and enemies. And then we'll say the phonetics. Semchen tamche dewa tang, dewe jutang dempa juchik, dunyal tang, dunyal chi jutang drawa juchik, dunyal mepe dewa tang pa tang min drawa juchik, Niring chadang tang talwe tang nyom chempo la ne pa jorchi. Paren sawe lama rinpoche, dagi chiwo pende dishukla, katrin chempo gone ji sungte, kusun chuchi ngudrup sao tu sol. So that last prayer is to my root guru, asking for his guidance, and so that whatever I relay to you is correct and will be helpful. So, Discovering Buddhism, and this part 3, is called, actually I wasn't sure what to call it, but I wanted to have this feeling of connection, interconnection. We're interconnected with all beings anyway, but in this particular instance, how that we connect with the Buddha, with all those who came after the Buddha, the great masters who came after the Buddha, and most importantly, how we connect with the Buddha within. Because fundamental to all the Buddhist belief is that every being has Buddha nature. So all the teachings are about accessing our own Buddha nature. And first we have to clear away whatever's getting in the way of that, which is our usual sort of mind afflictions, you could say. So the reason why I've started with the Buddha and we're going through the great masters is because in order to really get some understanding of Buddhism and to appreciate it, we need to know about it. We need to know about the Buddha, about what he did, and about those who came after him and who carried the lamp of his teachings and even augmented with commentaries and their own from their own enlightened minds. So when we know that the things that they did and the hardships that they went to and the sacrifices they made and the motivation that they had, it's not as if anybody was doing it for themselves, not at all. They sacrificed their lives for this. And so this is carried on from the time of the Buddha up to the present day. And so the more we know of this, the more we appreciate it. Our trust grows because we're coming from a point of knowledge rather than just sort of rumor or the odd thing that we've read. But we get the more knowledge that we have of it, then the more our trust develops and the more our faith develops. Not blind faith, but faith which is based on knowledge and on wisdom. And the only way to do that is to study, is to learn. So that's why we're going through from the time of the Buddha to the present day. Of course, that's 2,500 years, and we've got, an hour to cover. I think in the end of the second part, we finished sort of the Buddha he was in his 80s by this time. And so we've got to go from there and all through the history of Buddhism to the present day. Now, obviously, we're just skimming the surface, but it will give you some idea. And so I hope it will anyway. So let's just go back to the Buddha's last days, the very last days. So how did he actually die? So what happened was that, because he was a monk, because he was a bhikkhu, and people would give food for him and for the Sangha, which had swelled to exponentially. He had many, many followers by this time, of course. And so there was a mendicant, he was a metal worker. A metal worker, well now, those are kind of, in those days were considered untouchable because they had kind of dirty jobs that people didn't want to do. But he had this love for the Buddha, and he offered the Buddha some food. He offered him a meal. Now the Buddha had sight that he could see what was going to happen. He had foresight. He was fully enlightened. And he knew that if he accepted this meal, it would be his last, because the food was tainted, not on purpose, but it was just not very good, not very good food. But he accepted it knowingly, and he ate it. And the metalworker was very pleased to see that his offering had been accepted. And then the Buddha began to feel ill, and he got seriously ill. And of course the metal worker was distraught, and the Sangha were distraught, and he thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? Have I caused the Buddha to become ill? And the Buddha was getting really sick, and you could see that the metal worker was extremely upset. And he said to him, really, you don't need to be so upset. He said, it is said that whoever causes the Buddha, the awakened ones, to go from beyond this life and to reach what we would call, or what they call, parinirvana, mahaparinirvana. Maha means great, pari means beyond, and then nirvana is peace. So the great peace beyond, which happens when they leave this earthly body. So he was saying to the metal worker that he shouldn't be upset because he had caused the Buddha to go to parinirvana. It doesn't mean that you go to a geographical place, but it would cause him to go beyond, and that this was meant to be. So even in his last moments, he was continually teaching. And of course he was surrounded by the Sangha at this time. All the monks and nuns had come to be with him because he was obviously about to die, and he called them to have his last teachings. And just at that time, somebody wanted to come in. There was an old mendicant who wanted to come in, and this old man had some sort of question that he wanted to ask the Buddha, some point of Dharma that he wanted to clarify, and he was waiting to try and get in to where the Buddha was, but Ananda, who was the Buddha's main attendant, said, no, you can't come in now. This is not the time. The Buddha's extremely ill and could be his last days. And so he would not give him entry. But again, the Buddha, with his foresight, knew what was happening and said, Ananda, let him in. His name was Subhadra. So Ananda had to do as the Buddha asked, and Subhadra came in and spoke to the Buddha, and we don't know what the point of the Dhamma was that he was trying to clear up, but whatever it was, the Buddha cleared it for him, and then Subhadra was so appreciative and wanted to become a monk, and so the Buddha ordained him, more or less with his dying breath. He ordained this old mendicant, and he became the last monk before the Buddha died. And then the Buddha gave his very last teaching, the most important teaching, because it was the teaching on impermanence. And the Buddha himself said, if you had to choose which is the most important teaching out of all my teachings, the teaching on impermanence is the most important. And then he demonstrated that by dying. Of course, that was only the end of his earthly body. The mind is not born, the mind doesn't die. But his body had moved on, and so that was the end of that incarnation of the Buddha. So, what happened then? I mean, he left an amazing legacy of all his teachings. But so after all the rites had been done and everything like that, the relics that were left, the bodily relics that were left, were divided between the main sort of Sangha. And when I say main Sangha, what happened was they decided, there was a sort of council that gathered together, and this council was the sort of top 500 arhats. The arhats are the ones who are very, very highly realized. We can't say they were at the level of the Buddha, but they were already well on the way. And so the top 500 arhats gathered together into this first council, and they decided how they were practically going to be able to manage this, because the Buddha had given so many teachings, and not all of them were present at every teaching. So they sort of divided them up, if you like. And then it led to the next council and the next council, and that's how it started. But of course, they spread out throughout India. And so over the years, it came to pass that the different schools grew up, different sects would grow up that were all teaching the Buddha's teachings, but no one sect could teach all the Buddha's teachings. So in time, certain ones kind of specialized in different areas, you could say. And it carried on like that over the years. And it wasn't just the monks that would spread the teachings. The teachings were held by, you could say, held by the monastics, but because the Buddha had taught all sorts of people, then everybody that he taught had their own way of passing them on. Now, a few hundred years later, not that many, was it Ashoka, King Ashoka, there was this, he was a tyrant, he was a warlord. King Ashoka was an emperor, in fact, and he ruled in India. He had this vast territory, and he waged war on the other kings. It was kind of split up India's huge, so it was split up into different kingdoms. But Ashoka waged war with them all, and he gobbled up all the kingdoms until he was the main person. He held sway over almost the whole of India. And one battle that he fought in what is now near Patna, it said that this battle was so bloodthirsty, and he killed so many people, his armies killed so many people, that the rivers ran red with blood. So, this same guy, this same tyrant, actually started to feel bad about it. I mean, maybe it took the rivers of blood to sort of maybe think maybe this is not so great. But anyway, whatever the case, he had a meeting. He met this monk. It's not recorded who it was, just a monk that he met. But something in his conversation with the monk and his own kind of feelings, sort of starting to feel remorse, kind of caused him to have this epiphany. And he decided that he had to renounce all of this violence, all of this warfare, all of this awful way of being. And all that energy that he'd used to wage war, he now began to channel into the Buddha Dharma because of what he'd learnt from this monk, and also from one of his wives who was a Buddhist. And so he became the cause for Buddhism to spread, not only throughout India, but throughout all of his territory. So that means to what we now call Pakistan, and north to Kashmir, to Burma, virtually the whole of the Indian subcontinent. And the way he did this was he would erect monuments, stupas, we call them, or pillars, Ashoka's pillars, which were all over the rivers. He had them erected, these huge stone pillars which were carved with some of the Buddha's pith edicts and sayings and words of wisdom. So they were planted all over India, and the stupas, these great monuments. And he also caused people, the Sangha, to spread them. In fact, his own son and daughter became a monk and a nun, respectively. And he sent them off. He sent them off to Sri Lanka, what we now call Sri Lanka. And there they spread the Dharma, and they started a monastic tradition. So the son started a monastery, and the daughter, she started a nunnery. Now the daughter, she was called Sangamita, and King Ashoka entrusted her with a sapling, a very precious sapling that he had, which was taken from the Bodhi tree, the Bodhi tree where the Buddha became enlightened, the most holy site of Buddhism. That tree, so he had this sapling, he gave it to his daughter, he said, guard it with your life, take it to what we're now calling Sri Lanka, and plant it there. And that tree exists to this very day. It's the most holy site in Sri Lanka, one of the most holy sites in Sri Lanka. So that's, it said, one of my teachers, Siddha Rinpoche, said to me once, without Ashoka, it's possible that Buddhism would have died out. So important was he. And he'd gone from being such a baddie to being such a goodie. And so it's largely due to him that Buddhism was spread far and wide. He wasn't the only king that spread Buddhism. Some years later, I don't know how many, dates are not my strong point. You won't get definite dates from me, I'm afraid. But there was a king called King Kanishka, and during his reign, the Mahayana teaching spread. I think during the time of Ashoka, it was predominantly Theravada, Hinayana teachings that were spread. But some years later, King Kanishka, he was, by that time, the Mahayana teachings had begun to be taught more widely, and he was a Mahayana Buddhist. So he was more responsible for those teaching spreading. And so he would, not just in his own territory, but it became, often it would spread through the trade routes. So the merchants that were going to from India to on trade routes like the Silk Road to China, they would take a monk or two with them because for kind of travel insurance. You know, they figured if they had some monks with them, they'd be less likely to encounter danger or bad weather or whatever. So the monks would travel with the merchants and spread the Dharma to the countries that they were going to. So China was one of the main countries that the Mahayana teachings came to, and then from there China became sort of like the springboard for much of Asia, for Korea and Japan, all of South Asia. So in this way, Buddhism spread far and wide. At the same time, while Buddhism was being spread throughout Asia, in India, which was still the heart of it, there was a great flowering of Buddhism. It was became really widely spread, and the heart of within the heart would be the monastic. We call them universities, spiritual universities. We call them shedras in Tibetan. But so two of the main ones that we know about, because their ruins still exist, is Nalanda and Vikramashila. So they were huge as well. These big seats of learning where all the Buddhist teachings that were known were taught. So you had the Vinaya, which was the monastic rules and disciplines, vows, and then you had the Hinayana, or the first vehicle, the first turning of the wheel, which became the Theravadan Buddhism. And at the same time, you had Mahayana being taught, which was the great vehicle, the greater vehicle, which, if you remember, follows the Bodhisattva path, the thought of the motivation of becoming enlightened for the sake of all beings, so that you could bring all other beings out of suffering. That's the motivation. That's what made it the great vehicle. That's a philosophical views which we haven't got time to go into in great detail. But and then on top of that, you had also the third turning of the wheel, and this was called the secret mantrayana or chantrayana. Secret mantrayana, it's not that it was a big secret, it's just that the teachings were very advanced, so most people would not be able to understand them. They were taught kind of quite esoterically to those who had, a bit like the Mahayana teachings had first been taught, to those who were capable of who were at that level where they were ready to understand these teachings and progress in that way. So all of them were being taught in these universities at the same time. I mean, in the same epoch. So to whichever people were, it was appropriate for those to understand at whichever level they were. And so with the secret mantrayana, you could say that if you say that the first level is like the Hinayana, the foundation, then you have the Mahayana, which would be like the walls, and then you have the secret mantrayana or chantrayana, which would be like the roof. This is a building metaphor. But what I'm trying to say is that each depends on the other. It doesn't just exist on its own. It is depending on the basis of the other two. And it kind of, or if we take a more biological metaphor, we could say that the roots, the trunk, and the top of the tree, the flowers, the blossom, you could say. What it actually means in terms of why it would be appropriate for some and not for others. Let's take another metaphor. Let's say we're climbing a mountain. So for people who are quite slow walkers and take their time, they would have to go quite a circuitous route to get up the mountain. Those who had maybe a bit fitter could go maybe a slightly quicker route. And then those who are really very fit could go a very direct route. And that's how I would kind of describe the mantrayana, bearing in mind it's just a metaphor. So it's a more direct route because it uses all of the previous teachings, but with a much greater depth of understanding, much wider understanding, which could seem confusing if you weren't ready to understand it. But for those who were capable of understanding it, it gave them a much more direct route, so a quicker route, and it employed rich methods with mantras and visualizations and different meditations, which you needed to be at quite a high level in order to be able to use these methods. So these seats of learning had all of these teachings, and they would be taught according to the capabilities of the monks and nuns who were there, who were attending. So at this time, while these monasteries, Nalanda and Vikramasila, were flourishing, it was during this time that Buddhism went to Tibet. So because Tibet was one of the last places in Asia to get the teachings, it ended up that they got all of the teachings. Whereas the first lot of teachings that went, say, to places like Thailand, they would get the first turning of the wheel. The ones that went to China later on, they got also the Mahayana teachings, the second turning of the wheel. But Tibet got all of the teachings, the third turning of the wheel, the Tantrayana, secret Mantrayana, as well as the other two. Which is why Tibet became so important to Buddhism, because it became a repository for the entire Buddhist canon. And because it was such a sort of landlocked country for most of the time, the teachings remained very pure. But actually it wasn't quite such plain sailing as that, because there was sort of two waves of Buddhism going to Tibet. And so in the first wave, there was a king in Tibet called King Songtsen Gampo, who had received the Buddhist teachings through some of the monks who had come from India, and various adepts that had come from India, and he was really a very, very devout Buddhist. And so through him, he arranged others to go and invite teachers, and the main teacher that he invited was Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava means the lotus born. He has numerous names. Another name for him is Guru Rinpoche. It means precious teacher. He's also known as the second Buddha. He was enlightened as the Buddha was enlightened. And he had all of those qualities. And he came to Tibet. He went to Tibet and subdued some of the kind of... Tibet at that time was had quite a lot of sort of magic stuff going on, and different kind of, I guess you could say, pagan type religions, and it was quite a rough place. You know, there's a lot of bandits and things like that, demons and whatever, and so it needed somebody with a bit of oomph to subdue the less desirable forces that were there, elemental forces, and Guru Rinpoche was just the man for that. And so he caused really spread the first wave of Buddhism, and he also, along with the king, started the first monastery in Tibet. And that first monastery was called Samye. Does it ring a bell? So we have the first monastery was called Samye, and it's after that first monastery that the first monastery in Europe, not in Europe but in Scotland, was named after Samye Ling, and then where we are now is associated with Samye Ling. It's a kind of satellite branch of Samye Ling, so we're Samye Dzong. I'm jumping ahead a little bit there, but because what happened after 100 or 200 years, there were various other kings, obviously, who came and to rule, and they were also very much in devout Buddhists. But eventually, there was one who he I think he killed somebody. He might have even killed his brother Langdama. He was bad news. Anyway, he got onto the throne, and he was powerful, but really did not want like the Dharma at all, and tried to do everything he could to stop it from spreading and to clamp down on it. And so Buddhism kind of had to go underground, and anybody that was following Buddhism had to sort of do it in a kind of underground way. And that lasted for, I don't know, at least 100 years. And so ostensibly it looked like there was very little Buddhism happening. Of course, Tibet was huge. It's far beyond the little bit of what the so-called autonomous region that we call today. I mean, Tibet takes up a vast plateau of area. So anyway, during that time, it went underground, but eventually he met his end. I'm not quite sure how Langdama died, but anyway, he was superseded by another king who was brought back the Buddhism and wanted to engage again with it. And so this is the one we call the second wave of Buddhism started. And during the second wave, there was quite a bit of traffic between Tibet and India. So not only would Indian panditas, Indian teachers, be invited to Tibet, but also people would go from Tibet, because by this time there were some great masters in Tibet, and so they would go to India and to get more teachings and transmissions from the holy men in India. And so one of these was Marpa Lotsawa. Lotsawa means Marpa the translator. So Marpa was not a monk. He was a practitioner, a Buddhist practitioner. He was a farmer and a householder, but he was also very highly realized, but not fully realized. So he decided he was going to go to India and find a teacher who could give him the transmissions of the teachings that he lacked, and that he would be able to then bring back to Tibet. Now, this was no mean feat to go. This was in the around about the 11th century. So Marpa managed to gather the resources and left Tibet to go to India. Now, this was no mean feat. It wasn't like just jumping on a plane like we can today, but it was, you had to cross vast territories. There were bandits. There was bad weather. It was very, very hard. But he got there, and Marpa actually ended up spending a lot of his life there. He went 3 times to Tibet and encountered great dangers every time. But he met his premium teacher, his root teacher, who was called Naropa. Now, Naropa had been one of the head people in Nalanda University. He was like, you could say, the super spiritual professor, if you like. He was a great master and very, very looked up to, respected. But he had left Nalanda because he knew that although he had this great knowledge, he didn't have the full meaning. There's a difference between knowing the knowledge, the sort of in an academic way, and knowing the words and knowing the meaning. And so he went in search of a teacher who was called Tilopa. Now, Tilopa was a great adept, but you kind of had to be one to know one, because he was very kind of unconventional, to say the least. There isn't time to go into the wonderful lives of liberation of all these great masters, but suffice it to say that Naropa found Tilopa in the middle of nowhere, and Tilopa, who had had a similar life as the Buddha, in the sense that he had been born in a royal family, he had left all that behind, he looked like a beggar. But Naropa recognized him as his teacher. This great professor recognized this seeming beggar as his teacher. Tilopa means a grinder of sesame seeds. That was one of his day jobs. So to most ordinary people, they would think he was just this weird guy that sort of ground sesame seeds. And yet here was this great sort of professor coming to seek teachings. And Tilopa knew that Naropa had he had the potential to be fully enlightened, but the thing that was getting in his way a little bit was his pride, because he'd been so looked up to, and so he put him through a lot of trials and tribulations and really tested him. But such was Naropa's faith in Tilopa that he just unquestioningly did everything that Tilopa asked. Anyway, so he became enlightened, he became fully enlightened, and then his pupil was Marpa. Of course he had other pupils as well, but the Tibetan pupil was Marpa. And Marpa received all of his teachings from Naropa and took them back to Tibet. And this happened 3 times over the period of his lifetime, so this over a period of 20 years or so. And then finally he was in Tibet. He was married, he was a householder, but he was an adept. He was a practitioner. So as well as the monastic side, you also had these, you could say, the yogis, the tradition of yogi practitioners, great meditators. And in turn, he had disciples, Marpa had disciples, many disciples, chief of whom was Milarepa. Now, Milarepa is probably one of the most famous names of Tibetan adepts that you would ever hear. He was a yogi. He also had a sort of difficult life in the beginning because I don't know how much details to go into. He had a difficult start in life, let's just say that, and he resorted to sorcery to kind of redress the balance, and in doing so caused havoc. But he came to realize that this was not the way, and he went, in short, he went to study with Marpa. Now, similarly, Marpa knew about Milarepa, and he knew that he had such great potential, but because he had accumulated all this bad karma, he also had to put him through these trials in order to pay off his karmic debts. And Marpa just did everything that Milarepa did everything that Marpa asked of him, and it was really no mean feat to do that, because he would ask him to build a tower somewhere and then say, no, I didn't mean there, I meant over there, go and build it over there, and then he'd have to build on his own, carrying stones on his back, things like this. And then, I must have been drunk when I said that, just do it over there, and I want a triangle-shaped one and not that shape. And it went on like this over a period of years, until finally Milarepa's karma had been kind of paid off, if you like, and then he was told to go and meditate in the mountains, in a cave. And off he went, and he became enlightened in one lifetime. So he went, this is the ultimate baddie turns goodie, bad boy turns good boy, which is probably why he's very popular in Tibet, because it's kind of a very popular kind of story. And because it means that if you really put your mind to it, no matter what you've done in the past, you can change. You can not only just become better, you can become enlightened in one lifetime. That was what he did, Milarepa. So he's very widely appreciated and revered. So then Milarepa was this yogi. He spent most of his life in caves meditating. But people would come, and he did have disciples. He tried not to have too many because he wanted to be a solitary yogi, but he recognized that certain of his followers had the potential, and so he would pass on transmissions to them. And so one of his chief disciples was Gampopa. Now Gampopa, he was a monk. He wasn't born, he wasn't a monk straight away. He'd actually been a doctor. But he was prophesied by the Buddha. So he was not just an ordinary Tibetan doctor, but he'd had many, many different lifetimes, and Milarepa knew this. And so when he went to see Milarepa, he was actually, although he was a doctor, his family had got sick, and his wife and child died. And at that point, he decided to join the monastery, and he became a monk. So he already had a grounding in Buddhism, and was learned in the monastic tradition. And so when he went to see Milarepa, he was quite high up in the monastery, you know. Milarepa made him wait. He knew all of this, and he just made him wait a while and just let his ego, whatever bit of ego he had left, just sort of quieten down. And then he gave him his teachings. And this happened over many years. And so with Gampopa, this is really where the Kagyu lineage begins, because you have the monastic side and you have the yogi side, or the adept side, which coalesced and became one in Gampopa, Lord Gampopa, who started the Kagyu tradition, the Kagyu lineage, you should say. And so we have so much to be thankful for, because really you need both. The monastic tradition kind of has that structure which ensures that the teachings will carry on and be upheld. The yogi tradition has the sort of the high levels of meditation, and kind of broadens it all out so it doesn't become too structured. It's this precious amalgamation of both that becomes such a key thing, part of the Kagyu lineage. Not only the Kagyu lineage, but this is who we are, part of the Kagyu lineage, so this is what we're talking about. And so through Gampopa, he had many disciples, many disciples, because he was also the monastic side. And one of his key disciples was Dusam Chempa. Dusam Chempa means knower of the 3 times. That was actually a name that was bestowed on him later when he became enlightened, and he became the first Karmapa. And the Karmapas are the supreme heads of the Kagyu lineage throughout the ages. In fact, it was through the Karmapas that they started this system of coming back again and again and again to carry on the teachings. So it was the Karmapas that started that way of continuity. And so the first Karmapa, Dusam Chempa, when he established monasteries. He did a lot of building in Tibet, Sopo Monastery, and many monasteries, Kamagon. And then from him, the second Karmapa, and so on and so forth throughout the ages, until the 16th Karmapa and the 17th Karmapa, who is the current present head of our Kagyu lineage today. And he is called Karmapa Ojin Trini Dorji, and we have him to thank for where we are now. But I'm jumping ahead a little bit there, so I think we need to go back one Karmapa to the 16th Karmapa. So by the time His Holiness the 16th Karmapa became the Karmapa and head of the Kagyu lineage, this was now, we're talking about the 1950s. And in the 1950s, the armies of Mao Zedong decided to invade Tibet. And so this led to a great diaspora of the Karmapa, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama also, and all the different tulkus. Tulkus are enlightened, kind of reincarnate lamas. They had to leave Tibet because of what was happening, because of the destruction and the massacres. So during this time, 2 of the students of the 16th Karmapa was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Akong Tulku Rinpoche. Now these were young men, but they were the heads of their respective monasteries. We're talking about 20 years old, really very young, but they'd been abbots of their monasteries since they were little children, because they were recognized in that way. And so they heard about the armies, and they knew that they were coming, and then they found out that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had fled, and so they had to they had no choice. It was if they wanted not only to save their own lives, but to save the Buddha Dharma, because all the monasteries were being destroyed. And so if they wanted to save the Buddha's teachings, they knew they couldn't do that if they were going to be still in Tibet. And anyway, they'd probably get killed. So they decided they had to leave. And so in around about 1956, they decided they were going to leave together, and with a few other people, including Akong Rinpoche's younger brother, who was now we know as Lama Yeshe Losol Rinpoche, but at that time was called Jamdrak. He was only about 15. And gradually other people joined them. And it became a tremendously frightening and awful experience what they went through. In fact, I'm going to read, this is a book about Samye Ling, which actually Akong Rinpoche asked me to put together for the 40th anniversary of Samye Ling. But there's a bit on the back which I think says it, from this, what we're talking about right now. So, although it was established in 1967, Kagyu Samye Ling's story really begins in 1950s Tibet, when two young High Lamas and their followers were compelled to escape from their occupied homeland. The arduous journey from Tibet, first on horseback, then on foot, over the frozen Himalayas and into a scorching hot India, took a high toll and proved fatal to many travelling in the party. Fortunately, the Lamas themselves survived the harrowing hardships and dangers. Of the 300 or so people that left with them, there were only 11 that actually made it to the border. And they were like skeletons by this time. They had no food left. They hadn't planned on going such a hazardous route. But they couldn't go through Lhasa because it was completely occupied. So they had to go this roundabout way over the Himalayas, and so what they thought was going to take 1 month took 6 months. And so they ran out of food. They couldn't even take their horses there. They were reduced to eating the leather from their shoes or bags or any bit of leather they could chew to get any kind of little bit of nourishment. So they were like skeletons. By the time they reached the border, well, they didn't even know they were near the border. They went into a cave to die. That's how Rinpoche put it. He said, we thought this is where we would die. And he had these relics that he'd brought from his monastery, precious relics and Dharma accoutrements, golden things, small golden statues and things like that. And he remembered being in that cave near to death and reflecting, what is the use of all this if I'm going to die? Why am I bringing all this? But as it happens, they were found by some hunters, some Indian hunters, who fed them and took them to the border, and they managed to get on a plane, a cargo plane, the first time they'd even seen a plane, let alone been on one, and they made it into India. And so fate or karma then led to an extraordinary sequence of events that brought the Lamas from the teeming refugee camps of India to the dreaming spires of Oxford. Now, what actually happened was they met this incredible woman called Frida Bedi. Frida was actually English, and from the north of England, and she had gone to Oxford University, where she met, I don't remember his first name, but Mr. Bedi, who was also at Oxford. They got married. She went to live in India. She was a very intelligent and active woman, very strong woman, and so President Nehru, who was the president at that time, put her in charge of the refugees, the Tibetan refugees, and it was through her, because when Akhen Rinpoche came and Trungpa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, they met her, and she said that they were the most pathetic looking of all the refugees. They were the most pathetic looking. They were so thin and bedraggled, and she felt so sorry for them. And she also knew something about Buddhism. She knew about the Tulku tradition of reincarnate lamas coming back to teach the next lot of students. And so she knew that they were important people, and that if she could somehow get them to be educated and save them, that they would have a big influence on the rest of the Tibetan population. So it was her doing. And so over the years, that she finally managed to get them a scholarship to Oxford. So one of them, that was Trungpa Rinpoche, who could speak good English. So he went to Oxford, and Akhen Rinpoche, who didn't have English, but who was also a reincarnate Lama, he got a job to support them, so that they could he made a little bit of a living. And he had to take a very menial job, kind of like a hospital porter. Now we're talking about High Lama here. And so in Tibet he'd been treated with great, great respect and reverence, and he was the abbot of a monastery, and had everything done for him. And suddenly here he was, wheeling trolleys about and cleaning toilets and everything like that. And he said it was very tough, but it was a great education for him and taught him a lot. And he was also a doctor of Tibetan medicine. And so through connecting with one of the surgeons there, who realized that he had somebody who was quite extraordinary working for him, they managed to, it became sort of known that these were two special individuals, and that's how it started in Oxford, that they began to give some teachings. And meditate on meditation. This was still probably in the very, very early 60s. And so from that, they then needed to, it became very popular. And so they needed to find somewhere where they could hold their teachings and their meditation, because they'd outgrown this little bedsit. So their students decided to find somewhere. And it was through that they found Samye Ling. See what it says here? So yes, these indomitable young men founded the first Tibetan Buddhist center in the Western world. That was Samye Ling. Set in a lush green valley, cradled by the rolling hills of Estelmuir, Kagyu Samye Ling has grown from humble beginnings to become a world-renowned monastery and center of Tibetan Buddhist culture, with satellite branches across the globe, one of which I'm sitting in right now. So now we're here. Actually, maybe what I should do is talk a little bit about how that came to happen, because I first went to Samye Ling in 1993, thereabouts, and that was to hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'd heard that His Holiness the Dalai Lama was going to be speaking at this place. I didn't know what Samye Ling was at all, never heard of it. But it was the place that His Holiness was going to be giving a talk. I'd already read quite a lot of his books. I was sort of spiritually searching. I wasn't a Buddhist, but I was interested in it. And so I thought, well, this is a good opportunity. I should try and get there. And I went there. And really that was the beginning of me becoming a Buddhist. So I made a very great connection with him. He gave this wonderful talk about inner peace leading to world peace, which really resonated with me and with everybody that was there, I'm sure. Anyway, I left there. I didn't even look around Samye Ling. I just went to hear about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then I went back to Yorkshire, where I was living at the time. And then I went back again, this time to Samye Ling, to think, oh, well, I know what happened was they sent I somehow was on their mailing list, and they were raising money to buy Holy Island, and I thought that sounded wonderful, or to develop Holy Island. And so I didn't have any money to give them, but I could teach Qigong, so I offered to do that, and they accepted, and I found myself at Samye Ling, did some Qigong teachings, And then I stayed on, and that's when I met Akon Rinpoche. Somebody said, "Oh, why don't you meet? You can maybe make an appointment to meet Akon Rinpoche." And I didn't know who he was. He said, "Well, he's the person who founded it," and and I said, "Oh, well, that would be very nice," and I didn't really know what to expect. So I made an appointment, and on the day of the appointment, I went and took my lunch out. It was a really nice day, and I took my lunch outside into this garden, and there was a little family there. I don't know who they were or anything, but they looked a bit Asian. Didn't know. We chatted a little bit. There was a man and a woman and a daughter. It looked like their daughter, and we chatted a little bit. And then, as it was getting towards the time of my appointment, I said, "Oh, excuse me, I have to go, and I have an appointment." And I went off to get ready and clean my teeth, and I had no expectation of anything. I knock on the door. So half an hour later, I open the door, and there's the man who I've just been chatting to, having lunch in the garden, and that was Akon Rinpoche. And I walk in and I say, "Oh, it's you." That was my opening remark. I mean, on the one hand, I didn't know enough to even be in awe of him or anything. And anyway, we'd already broken the ice because we'd been chatting. So I walked in and he, sat down, and I just felt so happy and so. I remember feeling, as we spoke, and he wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't a monk by this time either. He was married. He had several children. So he was dressed in ordinary clothes, but he had this presence. It wasn't even what he said. He's a man of few words. His English wasn't even that great. But he had such presence, and I thought, how do you get to be like that? That was what I thought. How I want to become like that. And that was the beginning. That was me getting hooked in. And so I went back a few months later, and then I met Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, who was a monk there, and who was not yet the abbot, because Akon Rinpoche was still the abbot. And I really connected with Lama Yeshe, and we went to Holy Island on my birthday. It was everything sort of slotted into place. And then a few months later, I went to live there. And after about a year, I decided to take robes, which nobody was more surprised than me, but I took robes for the first time with Lama Yeshe, and then subsequently with Sicha Rinpoche. And there you go. Here I am. So after I'd been at Samye Ling for maybe about 10 years, I'd been studying there and was deeply into the Dharma and practicing and also working, a lot of work. Then the opportunity came to do a long retreat, a traditional 3-month retreat on Holy Island, which I'd helped to raise funds for and was quite instrumental with. And so I took that opportunity and I did a long retreat. And at the end of that retreat, Akon Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe asked me to establish somewhere in Edinburgh. Now, there already was a group in Edinburgh, but they didn't really have a property. So I came here. I didn't know Edinburgh at all. We found somewhere in the West End. I managed to raise some funds, and we got that place. And then after a few years there, it was a nice place, but it kind of wasn't. It was a bit awkward because we had to didn't have anywhere that was good for a shrine room. It was like a typical Edinburgh townhouse, so it was a sort of T-shaped room. And but then after a few years, I went to Germany with Lama Yeshe and with quite a few people from Samye Ling to take teachings from His Holiness Karmapa, who I already knew because I'd already been to Tibet and I met him when he was 12 years old. So by this time His Holiness had escaped from Tibet, and he was now in his, at that time would have been in his 20s. Probably late 20s, early 30s. It wasn't long ago by the time we got to these teachings in Germany. I'd already seen him a few times in India. Anyway, during this time, we were all sitting around him, and somehow he beckoned me up, and they'd been talking about properties and people getting centres, and we already had a centre, and so I wasn't quite sure what to say. It was a bit unexpected, and I said, "Oh well, Your Holiness," I gave him a kata, and he gave it back to me, and I said, "A kata is a white scarf that you offer," and I said, "Oh, well, we have got a nice centre in Edinburgh, but it's beginning to feel a bit small, and I wonder if Your Holiness may be able to give us your blessing to find somewhere a little bit bigger, a little bit more appropriate." And he just looked at this leaflet I'd given him with that centre on, and he looked at it and he nodded, and that was that. And then I sat down, and then the next day, which also happened to be my birthday, we flew back to the UK. And I went online, and somebody sent me a photograph, and it was the photograph of the precise moment when I was with the Karmapa, and he was looking at our leaflet, and I think giving me the blessing at that time. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I should check it out. So I went online, I Googled something like Edinburgh properties or something, and to cut a long story short, I saw a photograph of the place that we're sitting in now. And within a few months, we somehow managed to get it. And this is now Kagyu Samye Dzong Edinburgh. So basically, it's thanks to His Holiness the Karmapa and his blessing that we found this place and where I'm talking to you from right now. And now we seem to be at the point where we interconnect. Our interconnection. This is like the confluence of where the past flows into the present, where the global story and history becomes one with ours. It's like the confluence, the meeting of this big journey with our personal journey, and where our paths really connect. And it's also a strange kind of situation of during this global pandemic, this global pandemic that has led to this course being given online instead of in person, which has its advantages and disadvantages. I mean, I don't actually know who I'm talking to. I have to kind of imagine you. But on the upside, I do know that it's reaching many more people than would have been the case had it just been the people coming to this centre from around about. So that's good. And also from many different countries, I know that much, than would have been the case if it had all been in person. So I really just have to imagine you all. But I do know also that nothing happens by accident, and that everything happens because of our karma. And whether we know it or not, we've all chosen on some subconscious level or not to meet here and now, at this time, in this place, in these circumstances. And so all of this has come together, drawn us together through your interest in the Buddha Dharma and my interest in being a bridge, if you like, towards encouraging that interest and hopefully helping in some way. So I think it would be good to just pause for a little while. We've just spanned 2,500 years. I think we deserve a little rest, and maybe just a few minutes to sit and absorb and reflect. So get yourself into a good posture. If you need to have a little stretch, have a stretch first. And then when you sit down, either sitting cross-legged or in a chair, but either way, support your own back. That's really important. I think I've said this before. You're probably tired of hearing it already, but it is important because really we need to have a straight back. Feel that you're being pulled up as if you're growing up like a tree. Like the three teachings, the Hinayana, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, growing up like the big tree blossoming, and your spine becoming straight but not rigid. Just let your eyes rest, looking slightly downwards but keeping them open so that you can remain alert, relaxed, but alert. Just let your breathing relax, using your lungs, your diaphragm, your belly, fully breathing. Eyes resting. Just let your mind settle in its natural state. You don't have to make something happen, you don't have to fabricate anything. Rest in your natural state of awareness. Allowing the mind to rest naturally. Breathing, using all of your body, breathing naturally. Mind and body resting here and now. Just taking a few moments to sit with this and enjoy the amazing events that have led to this point throughout time and space, converging here and now. Wherever you are, it's always here and now, at this precious moment of interconnection, inspired by the Buddha Dharma. So I'm afraid that wasn't very long, but we've just had to cover quite a lot of ground, and it's taken a little bit of time. So feel free to continue your sitting meditation when we finish. And so that's it. This is the end of this particular course of Discovering Buddhism. Of course, we've just skimmed over things, you know. But I hope it's given you some kind of feeling and understanding of the history and of how it came to be here now, and that you can feel you can connect with it, because really that's what it's about. It's about acknowledging our interconnection and connecting with the Buddha within. This is where all the teachings will lead. In fact, it hopefully will be the beginning. It might be the end of this course, but it can be the beginning of some more courses that we can offer online, as well as in person. Hopefully this pandemic will not go on for too long, but if you feel that it's of benefit, then I can give some more teachings online. And I think the best thing is to keep an eye on our website if you're not, or if you can get on our mailing list, which you can do on our website. That's the best way, because then you'll get a monthly notification of when courses are happening, and you keep up to date. So actually, one more thing though. I think in the meantime, before we meet again, I will try and get something going. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, but it'll follow on from where we've left off, and so and it will be really more to do with your mind and how to practice. So I think we've got enough information for starters. Of course, everything that we've talked about, you could look up for yourself and really delve into. And in fact, I would encourage that. In fact, let's see, if you want to, we talked about Milarepa. Now, this is quite a big tome, but this is the 100,000 songs of Milarepa. I don't know if it actually is 100,000, but Milarepa used to teach in songs, and they're wonderful. They're very pithy, very earthy. They're quite funny, some of them, but they're always wise. They're always right on the point. If I had only one book to take with me on a desert island, this would be it. And so I would recommend that. And if you would like something more kind of modern, I would recommend this. Now, this is a book called Interconnected, exactly what we've been talking about. Now, it's not just about Dharma, it's actually to do with the environment and the world and everything, how we're all interconnected together, and it's by His Holiness the 17th Karmapa. So if you want, this is not quite as big, and might be easier for you to get your head around. So I would definitely recommend this. It's by Wisdom Books. You can look up Wisdom Books, Interconnected. So there you go, you've got plenty to be going on with. And if you want to know more about Samye Ling, you can get this from the Samye Ling bookshop online. So that's it for now. I hope you'll take time to meditate and reflect on the deep meaning of these sessions when you can just really take your time, and we're not sort of thinking about, we've got to finish or anything like that. And so I think it just remains for us to dedicate the merit of our practice, of our time together, and to share it, to share the benefit with all sentient beings, and to really feel that from the heart. The world needs it. Goodness knows we need it. So we bear that in mind. I'll just say it in English first. Through the wholesomeness of this practice, may all the mental defilements be overcome, and may all beings be liberated from the ocean of samsara, of suffering, stirred by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. We say that in the Tibetan. O sonam di tamche zikpani, topne nyepe danam pamchene, jigana chi balak drukpai, sipe sole jowar sho. Go well, be safe, be joyful.